Thank you, Ryan. So the first thing I have to do is give you a disclaimer. I don't work for Microsoft. I don't speak for Microsoft. I don't work for the HoloLens team, and I don't speak for the HoloLens team. So as far as that goes, don't take anything as gospel. That also gives me a lot more freedom to talk about the technology and sort of the things that I see going on and the sort of things I'm really excited about. So this is going to be an intro into the HoloLens that tries to give you an overview. And this is sort of a propitious time because we're also seeing Microsoft release some virtual reality related devices also, which really expands the sorts of things that Microsoft is getting into as far as digital reality experiences. Okay, so the first thing has to do with terminology. Traditionally, HoloLens would be considered an augmented reality device, but Microsoft has really rebranded it, and many of its competitors have done something similar. They're talking about these more as mixed reality devices, and here's why. Because for the past year, 2 years, 3 years, when we talk about augmented reality, we think in terms of this, of Pokemon Go. These are experiences that are on your phone, right? And mixed reality, or what Microsoft and some of these other companies are doing, is really trying to take that to the next level. This is mixed reality compared to what you saw before. So it was important to also give it a special name to distinguish these two things. Let's talk about the HoloLens hardware a little bit. And it's a fairly exciting and big deal. Uh, the first thing you want to know about is the waveguides. And the waveguides are sort of these lenses at the front of your HoloLens. And the way they work is a lot like the way your cable works, where it uses internal reflections to send data over big areas. And so what happens with the HoloLens is it's actually got a projector above the nose. The projector will send down images this way. And then that image actually turns approximately 90 degrees, a little bit less, to face your eyes. And the reason this is done is that you get a very clear, bright image that's projecting digital stuff overlaid on top of the real world. And this is about as bright and as clear as you can get it at this point in time. But then the other really cool, amazing thing about the HoloLens is the sensors. And what the sensors do in order to make these experiences really amazing is they perform scans of the world around you. And these scans are basically, let's say they're digitizing the world. They're trying to create a digital version of it. And the reason it does this is because the really great experience, the really immersive thing is when your digital content is not only layered over on top of the world, but it actually interacts with objects in the world. And the reason Microsoft was able to do this is because they had actually invested since about 2008 in using depth cameras. And that initially went into the Kinect camera. And what this is doing is let's imagine it's actually throwing out photons into the room and timing how long it takes for these photons to bounce back to the camera. This gives it a very clear picture of how far things are from the device itself and allows it to do these 3D scans of the world. Now, what's interesting about that is that the team that originally did the Kinect is also the same team that's eventually working on the HoloLens. So you've seen a gradual development from the Kinect for the original Xbox to the Kinect 2, which use much more sophisticated technologies, to eventually having these technologies embedded into the HoloLens itself in order to do these 3D scans. More than that, it's doing really sophisticated algorithms in order to stitch all these different images that it finds in the room together. And finally, using a SLAM algorithm, which comes out of robotics, to place you inside the world, inside the room that you've scanned. And then as you walk around it, it uses that data to figure out how you've moved around the room. Okay, so was the HoloLens good for in that case? Um, HoloLens actually is going to let you do several things. And remember again that this is relatively new as far as something being put out into the commercial space, currently for $3,000 to $5,000, depending on the version that you get, which seems expensive, but compared to what had to be done before to get this sort of experience working is relatively inexpensive. And so people are looking at how to use this inside the real world, inside the enterprise, in a way that actually makes sense cost-wise. And here are a few things. First of all, architecture. In architecture, you constantly have to develop an appreciation for these structures that aren't even built yet. And you have to have discussions about them. You discuss materials. You discuss pricing. And what occasionally happens is you can do something in AutoCAD or related technologies where you do a 3D image and people will stand around a screen to look at it. Or sometimes I'll even do some manufacturing. So you create a 3D physical model and look around it. And the problem there is it takes a long time to do loops of these discussions. So by putting it inside the HoloLens as a 3D image that multiple people can see at the same time, not only do you get a chance to have a real-time conversation about what's going on, but if you ask for a change, since the change doesn't have to be done physically, it's actually all being done digitally, you can get very fast turnaround time so that you can discuss something that's immediately in front of you. And considering that architecture projects can be very, very expensive, when we look at $3,000 or $5,000, or let's say in the range of $10,000 for multiple devices, just to facilitate those conversations and avoid problems, the cost benefits really outweigh the cost at that point. Design is another thing. And really anything that we currently do in 3D, the HoloLens can make a more interesting and a more practical experience. So when you're doing 3D designs, it's always awkward and strange to have to do 3D inside 2D, right? Because you never get to walk around the object itself. You never get to play with it as if it's in the real world. And when you're designing 3D experiences, that's really an important thing. So the HoloLens is able to take 3D models that you create, import them into the world at the accurate size, so that you can see how it actually looks. Let's say if you're building teacups or a teapot, how it looks in a real kitchen, or if you're designing a lamp, how it looks in a real house, or finally, if you're designing furniture, how it looks in your living room. These are the final things that are really important to understand whether you want to go forward with manufacturing objects like these. Engineering is another field where it makes a lot of sense. Let's say that you're working with jet engines or something like that, and you're looking at repairs. It's really expensive to take a jet engine around with you. They're big. But if you had 3D images like this, what you could do instead is work with a hologram of your engine. And you can even use it for instruction of engineers, that you can start taking it apart without taking apart a real engine to show how the pieces actually fit and work together. It also means you can, if you've got one expert, they can travel around the world inexpensively without taking engines around with them and meet with different engineers in order to deal with that. Education is another world where both VR and AR can really contribute a lot. And part of the reason is simply that these are really captivating experiences. They help concentrate the mind. And in the VR world, it's called presence. In the AR world, it's slightly different. You don't have the full presence experience where the rest of the world is shut out. But at the same time, it's also captivating because you have this interaction between the real world and these digital objects. And so if you're able to capture somebody's mind with rich images and rich experience, it's much easier to help people recall and memorize the sorts of things you need to learn, such as anatomy, let's say, or engineering jet engines. Telecom. So this is an experience that was written at Microsoft. They called it holoportation. And an engineer in Redmond, Washington, wanted to talk to his daughter in, I believe, South America. And using the HoloLens and some very sophisticated cameras, they were able to build up 3D images in real time to facilitate this sort of communication. And obviously, if you've ever seen Star Wars communications, in many ways, that's where the idea comes from. And it's very exciting to think that possibly someday this is one more way in which we can have conversations. Lifestyle is another thing that's really important for the HoloLens. They've done several vision videos about it. And the notion of the lifestyle is simply that if you're in the living room playing games, watching movies, and so on, you're still looking at a very small box, relatively small, at the far end of the room. But with HoloLens, you can augment that with other things going on. So for instance, in a vision video, Microsoft imagined a football game where you would actually have 3D football games on the table in front of you. You'd have stats on the walls. You would have 3D images of the players. In some ways, the technology isn't quite there today to house something that big, but certainly in 3 years, we can see the engineering improving so that we could have something very close to that. Finally, retail is another experience where these sorts of mixed reality devices could make a lot of sense. And at this point, we're not talking about what's going on now. We're not even talking about what's happening in 3 years. We're probably looking more in the 5 to 10-year range. But imagine that we take these devices and we actually make them small enough and inexpensive enough that they can be distributed to consumers readily. If we're able to do that, we can imagine a world where people are actually wearing these all the time in a way that's similar to glasses. And as they walk along the street, by pairing this with computer vision algorithms, you can walk down the street and look at somebody's jacket and decide that that's really attractive to you. You do a scan in order to find that jacket online, and you get multiple retailers. You pick the one that you're most interested in. The system can then go into your digital wallet and allow you to make a transaction right there and have that object shipped to your house either that day or the next day. So this is a next generation retail experience that obviously is really interesting to various retail stores for whom probably real estate and in-store services are one of their biggest expenses. But games, so obviously, especially for this audience, games are what we're probably most interested in. And definitely games is something you can do with the HoloLens now. So one of the interesting things about the way HoloLens is marketed is, and again, you remember I said previously that it helps that I don't actually work for Microsoft. I can talk from the outside. So from the outside looking at the marketing, one of the interesting things is all the initial products that they came out with actually happen to be games, but at the same time, they're driving a message for various cost reasons that they're targeting the HoloLens to the enterprise. And it's kind of a fascinating trade-off because at this point in time, if your device is $3,000 to $5,000, it's very hard to get people to buy it in order to play games. That doesn't seem like a cost-effective thing to do. But at the same time, even if you're looking at the enterprise, games have always been one of the best ways to highlight what a device is capable of. And so there's this sort of going back and forth where on the one hand we discuss enterprise scenarios, but when we actually do demos, we tend to do gaming demos more because especially for experimenting with UX, that's kind of the best way to see what the device is capable of. And at this point in time, I think we've mostly covered most of the types of games that are possible in the HoloLens in one way or another. People have developed platform games for it. One of the recent ones that came out, if you remember, a traditional game called Lemmings. Somebody did Lemmings 3D so that you would have these lemming creatures walking across your living room furniture and falling off the edge of your table. You've got first-person shooters. One of the first games that came out for the HoloLens was actually a first-person shooter where you've got aliens coming through the walls and you have to blast them all the way. Adventure games, there's one or two, strategy games and so on. All these can currently be done with the HoloLens. And actually one of the exciting things, since we're waiting for the technology to mature even more, is there's a good opportunity just to practice building small games to see what works and what doesn't. So here's a big question. What does mixed reality look like today and what's it going to look like in the future? And right now, HoloLens seems to be ahead of the curve. It came out much earlier than other similar devices. Among its competitors is Magic Leap down in Florida, which seems to be much further behind schedule than people initially supposed, but they're also extremely well funded. There's another company, or actually two companies out in California, Meta, which has a Meta 2 device, and also Dacry, which has something that's really geared more towards construction and industrial situations. And the technology there, especially the tracking technology for doing hand gestures and so on, isn't quite up to the level of HoloLens at this point. But still exciting to know that there are lots of people out there working on different problems. So there's always sort of a trade-off. There are other companies that have a wider field of view than the HoloLens does, but they sort of fall short in other ways, such as actually tracking a room and so on, which the Microsoft technology seems to have down. Um, so that's really the big question. There's a huge potential for the HoloLens eventually replacing our smartphones today. I mean, the HoloLens is in fact just a PC. It's a PC that you wear on your head. It's similar to your smartphone, which is a very powerful computer which you can carry around your pocket and which we use in a variety of ways. But at some point, these are going to converge. And what you can do in a smartphone, you can ultimately do on these mixed reality devices also. And so the question is there going to become a time where people will switch from one over to the other? There are definitely advantages to having this headwear, one of which is people aren't always looking down at their devices, which is slightly antisocial. And we're all aware of the social situations with people always paying attention to the phones. But also, it's kind of unsafe too. If you're walking across the street, it's scary to see somebody looking at their phone while there's traffic going around. So these are advantages to switching from a handheld device to a wearable device that goes on top of your head. And that's one of the future possibilities. But of course, there's always the other one, that we're looking at something that's being hyped up at this point. So there are various reasons. For me personally, I feel that the HoloLens isn't going that way, that HoloLens really is a huge innovation, and the mixed reality devices that are built to go along with it, they're competing with it at this point, I personally feel have the potential and will really transform the way we do computing. For instance, let's say 10 years ago, we were all computing on PCs. More and more as consumer devices, we do our computing on our phones. Eventually, I think we'll be doing computing with wearables like this, a wearable device that you wear on your head, where you can always carry your information around with you. And some of the scenarios I talked about are reasons why this could work really, really well. So really the big question on whether this is going to succeed or not is in a lot of ways the same thing that happened with the smartphone when Apple first came out with it. The miracle thing for the smartphone was not the device itself, as wonderful as it was. It was really coming up with a store with cool applications that people felt they had to have. And that's what we can look forward to in this sprint between now and the next 3 to 5 years, where even if it's not necessarily a killer app, there have to be really cool apps that captivate people's imaginations. And one of the neat ways of doing that is that, in a certain sense, we've always had AR for the past, say, 30 years or more. AR has been a staple of science fiction movies all this time. We've grown up with it. We've even grown to expect it, which is why it was very exciting to see these devices now and sort of know what we want them to be doing. So if people can tap into those movie experiences and also create this in HoloLens, I think that's one of the ways where we'll get a chance to really jump on top of it, get some momentum under it, and that depends on developers to start working on this and figure out what UX scenarios actually work. And again, gaming is the best way to do this, simply because gaming is able to show off the technology at this point much better than enterprise solutions do. So Ryan, do we have questions?
Yeah, I do have one.
Okay.
So just repeat the questions for the sake of the stream. But Nathan Brower asked, how reliable is the tracking in large spaces such as a warehouse?
Okay. So how reliable is the tracking in large spaces? The big trick, even in warehouses, is going to work well as long as you have things in the room that are identifiable. The way the tracking actually works is very similar to what happens in the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift, where you're basically pulling in different sensor information. You're getting the gyroscope, the magnetometer, and then accelerometer, basically to figure out where your head is facing and to a certain extent what direction you're moving in. It can figure out the angular acceleration. What the little bit extra it needs, because even with those three inputs, there's a bit of drift, is it needs something else to tell it where it is. So if you're familiar with the Vive, it's got those lighthouse sensors that help prevent the drift. And that's actually working at a lower technology level. It's not quite as fast as the other things, but it's just enough to tell you where you are. Oculus Rift similarly uses an external device in order to do that. The HoloLens is sort of fascinating because it's using an inside-out device. It's using black and white cameras in order to find features in the room. So as long as it can find features, it can perform this feat. And what it does with the features is it just fixes on it. So that even as you're moving, it can recognize to a certain extent how much those features, even not at high resolution, is drifting around the room. And that allows it to adjust itself. So that was a long-winded answer, but basically in a large warehouse, this will work as long as you've got features in the room that are identifiable. And basically that means corners are really great, flat walls are not so great for doing this sort of tracking.
Okay, I got another question you want to answer. So what are some thoughts on how to make the interface user-friendly? Do tiles have to be especially large or colorful?
Interface.
So talk about designing interfaces for HoloLens apps, I guess.
Right, so yeah, we'll take it that way. This is a general question about design. Microsoft is using, as part of its UI, the Windows 10 design language. So it's adapted the tile language to the HoloLens also, where you can bring up a start screen that has small tiles. In turn, those tiles can be pinned to areas inside your room as much larger tiles. Attractive images are important. Color contrast is really important too. Those are two ways to make those things stand out. Another really cool way is to take advantage of the fact that you can make these tiles face you all the time or even turn away from you. You can make them wiggle every so often. And these are all things that we currently do with 2D interfaces. If you'll notice in Windows 10, if you've got tiles on the screen, when you tap on them, sometimes they'll tilt a little. And small animations like that can be really effective for making your visual imagery stand out much more. On the bigger question, I would think of how to design for the HoloLens in general. I think it's just currently a big question right now. It's something people are trying to come to terms with. And if you think about the web revolution, it probably took us a good 10 years to nail down design languages in general so that we got rid of marquees and all these really weird effects that we used to have and start standardizing not only on a common web language, but create an environment and sort of cultural standards that even if they change over time, most of us tend to agree what looks good on the web now, what looked good 2 years ago, and then we're all searching for what's going to look good in 2 years. But the drift is much less than it used to be. And the HoloLens, on the other hand, you can think of as being really at the starting edge of that design bubble, where people are still trying to figure out how to make things look good. And sometimes that even happens accidentally. So that's also one of the exciting things about the HoloLens. Nobody's really done 3D design like this before. So for people looking for a challenge where just figuring out the web is sort of same old these days, this is a fantastic both UI and UX challenge. How to make 3D interfaces attractive, but also how to just make them useful and intuitive.
Okay, got one more question.
All right.
Do you have any experience with the new headsets that were shown at like Ignite, such as like the Acer mixed reality get kits, and how do they differ from the HoloLens from like technical aspects, tracking, usability?
Right. So the question is about these new mixed reality devices. Microsoft is also calling them mixed reality, which I personally find confusing, but there are reasons why that can also make sense. Devices are just coming out now. I think really they're probably targeted towards December for the Christmas rush, and they're being manufactured. They're slowly being rolled out. Ideally, they're probably being rolled out to developers at this point because ultimately, if the marketing goal is to ship these out in December, you actually have to have games that are playable on them before that time. The difference between those devices and the HoloLens itself is We could say it's partly a language thing. So the HoloLens is transparent. You can see the real world through it. And this is a mixed reality device. The way of thinking of these other new devices that are coming out is that they're occluded mixed reality devices, which just means they're shut in. You don't see the world through them. Um, and in that sense, they're very similar to the Oculus and to the HTC Vive. What makes them distinctive and why they're part of this whole Microsoft push is they're using the same tracking technology that we just talked about a little bit earlier, having to do with the warehouse. So what's really great about these is while the Vive and the Oculus require outside-in cameras to track you, these devices, both the HoloLens and these new devices coming out with from Lenovo and Acer, don't require that because they use the same scanning technology and you carry it around with you. So there's much less setup in order to do VR that way. On the other hand, whereas the HoloLens is a standalone device, these new devices will actually have a cord that plugs into your PC. So your PC and your video card is driving the experience in that case. And that's actually a good thing because it lowers the prices. So in general, with these new devices, it looks so far, and this isn't definitive, that the price is going to be a lot lower as long as you already have a decent PC. Um, and it's also got um, much easier setup because you don't have to set up the lighthouses or anything like that inside your room. As far as the development technology, my understanding, I could be wrong, is that it's going to use the same development stack that the HoloLens currently does, which is basically Unity for UWP. So you build a Unity app, you use toolkits and plugins that are designed for the HoloLens or these new mixed reality devices, and then you export them as a universal Windows platform application that you then deploy to the Windows Store. So that's another area where the story is probably going to be a little different from what we know today, such as being able to do an HTC Vive application on Steam or going through Oculus's store.
Okay. Do you want to take another question or move on and take some more questions later?
It depends. Do we want to do demos or?
I think demo would be cool.
A demo would be good? Okay. So what I'm going to try to do now is, I think one of the great things about the augmented reality is to a certain extent, we already know what it is from the movies. We know what we want out of it. So what I want to do is take various TV shows over the past 15 years and movies, show you the UI from that, and then show you something equivalent in the HoloLens. And keep in mind that we've only been doing HoloLens development for about a year now. I think all the applications I'm going to show you came out over the past year, and they've gone pretty far. So let's first look at this scene from Firefly. Okay. And it's basically seen of an operating room where you get to see a skeleton overlaid on top of the person. So the notion is you can get additional information about what's going on in the individual's body without doing anything invasive, without invasive procedures. Okay. So now I'm going to use a tool to try to show you what I'm seeing inside the HoloLens. Okay.
James live stream.
Sorry. Okay, so let's see if I can bring this up. And this is an app done at University of Cincinnati, I think, from Case Western Reserve called HoloAnatomy. So, okay. I'm just trying to bring it up. It's loading now. So this is initially an education application. It brings up a skeleton over here. Fairly accurate. And this is intended for education at this point. But one of the things people are really excited about is because, for one thing, it's passively cooled. This is something that can be brought into a sterile area, and it also leaves the doctor's hands free. So the notion of being able to do these sorts of experiences and provide information to the doctor while he's doing surgery or other work is kind of exciting at this point. And obviously, again, that's a scenario where the benefits will greatly outweigh the costs. So I'm going to move on to another experience now. So I can get PowerPoint to work for me. In any case, if you remember from Avatar, one of the big scenes, and following Avatar, you'll actually see this in movie after movie after movie, is the notion that you have a command and control center where in the middle of the room, you actually have a topical map of this area that you're looking at. And that's a fairly compelling idea because, again, it gives you a center point that everybody can be discussing, similar to architectural projects. But more than that, if you're doing something in real time, say military adventures or something like that, well, it's just visually really cool is the big thing. So let me show you an application by a company called Tactile that's called HoloMaps that does something similar. And again, I need to bring up this remote tool to preview. And it's connecting. Excellent. Let me see. There it is. And it looks like it's starting up, so we'll do a little bit of setup. But the notion here is just to do a 3D map of the city and try to create a compelling experience. One of the things I really love about this company, Tactile, is they do a fantastic job with their UI and UX. So I think they really knocked it out of the park about as far as how you would develop an experience like this. The design is circular. You've got a city in the middle. And you can actually move in and out and so on. So let's look closer and closer. And you can walk around it. And you notice also the menu follows from. So again, this is sort of a variation on all the mapping apps that we have today. This is what we can do immediately. Imagine what might happen in 3 to 5 years with smaller devices where it makes more sense to walk around the streets with them. You could actually get these top-level maps of the area around you in order to figure out where you are. So let's do one more. So the Terminator, this is almost a traditional idea of what augmented reality can be used to do. Probably the first versions came out in mid 80s, I think. And what's really cool about this is it shows the possibility of linking up these 3D technologies with artificial intelligence. And that's one of the things that people are really looking at now. Not only are we at a point in time where we're getting all these VR and AR devices finally out, but artificial intelligence has sort of gone into a renaissance at this point. There have been major breakthroughs over the past few years. And not only are we moving in leaps and bounds with figuring out how to use artificial intelligence, but lots of money is being poured into it by major companies, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, simply to see what they can make of it. So let me show you an app I created a while ago. My menu, here we go. Where this actually plugs into, and fingers crossed that's actually going to work and the internet is working well in here. What it does is it hooks into a service that Microsoft provides called Cognitive Services. And while it's scanning the room, it's going to try to take pictures of objects. And it looks like it's not finding the internet connection, so I'm just going to sort of describe what it does. Which is, it takes pictures of the room. That was my error message. It takes pictures of the room over time, and it actually sends these up to the cloud, to Microsoft's Cognitive Services, which are sort of simplified AI. And the AI there is going to do an analysis of these photos, find objects in the room, and send back information and tell you what you're seeing, actually. Beyond that, it's also got a feature, if it was working, where it's going to read text in the room and translate that. And finally, if the text is in foreign language, it's going to identify the language and then attempt to use translation services to render all of that back into English. And this is sort of a baby steps project just to show the feasibility of doing something like that. But again, imagine 3 to 5 years where the devices are much lighter, where they're more portable, and actually constantly getting this information as you walk around just your neighborhood. So those are a few ideas, a few of the things that people are trying out with these augmented reality devices and that they've been working on for the past year. I'm really excited about what people are going to come up with over the next year or two.
Okay, so more questions then?
Okay.
Okay, so we had something in the chat follow up about, or talk about tracking.
Yeah.
So he originally asked if tracking is lost, how quickly does it regain its position? I kind of answered that in the chat a little bit, but then we started talking about how much space the HoloLens holds. So can you talk a little bit about how the scanning works, about how much memory the
Right.
HoloLens can hold to, store 3D representation of space and so on?
Right, so the question is about when the HoloLens scans a room, how much space it can actually hold in memory and so on. This is actually really fascinating. I understand a little bit. For the most part, it's a little bit secret, and occasionally somebody from Microsoft will give a talk, and so you can glean bits and pieces of what's going on. So one of the things I know it does do is it tries to not only scan a room, but saving that off as a 3D mesh, which it can update over time. say for instance, if people move objects around the room and so on. But what's really fascinating about that is the HoloLens seems to have a lot of storage space in order to keep these rooms alive. And so if you've been in a room, go away for a month or two, which I have. I do a users group downtown. Whenever I come back, it's able to identify that you're in that same room again, and it pulls up those same meshes and continues the scanning from there. So as far as that goes, the way it holds memory and stores room information is really amazing. Um, An interesting fact about that is it doesn't have a GPS on board at all. That's one of the technologies that they decided didn't really need. And so it's using other techniques in order to identify whether you're in the same room or not. Probably one of them is just doing a match of the room against what's already been scanned. But another way is just looking up internet connections and trying to identify where you are based on those. Um, my understanding of how technology works underneath is when all these blocks and meshes are being saved off, it's actually being done as a cube. So you have stacked cubes, and I forget exactly how big they are. Um, I think maybe there are two cubes right in front of me now. And what it does is it lays these side by side on top of each other if you actually attempt to scan them. And because it works in that way, it's almost as if there's a way of paging all this information about the room so that even if you have a large warehouse, you can walk through it. And even as these different cubes are being saved separately, it knows the orientation of the cubes to each other, their relative positions. And that allows memorization of really huge spaces. I know, or I've heard about experiments where people have actually gone out into the forest where because of the trees, there's just at least enough information in order to figure out where you are. And they've dropped objects in the forest, which is fairly random. And they'll come back a few weeks later, and the objects that they placed, these visual objects, are still there when they come back. So that's sort of an anecdotal example of how this memorization seems to happen.
Can you talk about so when developing Unity, developing in Unity for HoloLens, what are some of the main things developers need to keep in mind to do it effectively? Or like, what are some of the main differences between developing for HoloLens specifically over just normal
Right.
Unity developers?
Right. So the question is, what do Unity developers, or if you're developing Unity, what do you need to know that's special about the HoloLens? I think there are two big ones, kind of, there are gotchas. The first one is, and this is actually kind of nice. There's something called the HoloLens Toolkit, which is out on GitHub, which is open source. Microsoft did a lot of the initial development, but there's a fairly large community around there that's always adding components and samples. And that's the tool you need to access the sensors and other information that the HoloLens provides. There's no easy way otherwise in order to get that raw information. So if you're using Unity, then you need to go out and get the HoloLens toolkit, build for Unity, get it into your project so that you can actually get the sensor information, you can get the room information, you can time your scans of the room, and other similar things, including just capturing gestures is another feature that's in there. And then just other weird kind of cool things such as finding planner surfaces that you can lay objects against. Um, so that's the first thing you need. The second thing you always have to watch out for is that these Unity apps are being built for UWP. So it starts off as a regular Unity app, you're running against Mono when you're in the IDE. However, when you export this into UWP, it doesn't use Mono as a backend anymore. It's actually using .NET Native. So one of the weird things about that is if you're used to regular Unity development, there's generally good support going between platforms, but there's still a gap now on certain things when you move from Unity over to UWP because you've got these two different versions of .NET in the background, really. Um, so you have to watch out for that. Sometimes things that are working in your IDE will not end up working in UWP. Probably another issue that always comes up is that not all plugins work well in UWP. Most of the plugins were written before that. They work well on Java and other platforms. When you export it to UWP, because UWP is first of all, it's very safe, but it's a sandbox. So occasionally things just don't work there, and that can be really frustrating. Um, yeah, so those are the two things. But always keep in mind that you're going back and forth between two different versions of .NET. It's easy to forget that.
Okay, so this next question actually sort of might actually build on what you just answered. But somebody asked, does the HoloLens support Xbox One, One S, Scorpio, so all the different SKUs of Xbox console? And kind of like how does deployment affect that?
Yeah, think about that. So the question is, how's HoloLens work
Yeah,
for Xbox?
they, well, the original question, like what exactly they asked is, will it support Xbox One, One S, and Scorpio? So I guess comment on, any plans that, that Microsoft has for, console HoloLens.
Right. So the thing to remember is that the Xbox is ultimately a PC. With the Xbox One, that happened a while ago. Um, but the HoloLens is also a PC. It's not really a peripheral device. It's another computer. So we're really asking about how do you get two computers to talk to each other, um, and really use the same networking tools and software tools that you would now. And it's possible to do that. So you would think about it in terms of you've got two different UWP apps running on two different Windows 10 environments, and you just have to find a way to have them talk to each other. So there are a lot of socket solutions to do that. But there's a project that Microsoft is developing now called Project Rome, which will actually allow you to have the same UWP application running on two environments that will find each other and actually do messaging back and forth. And that can be really fascinating. I don't think anybody's done it yet. This is like one of those ideas in the back of my mind where if I had a long weekend, I would really love to do it, which is just to create a first-person shooter or just steal somebody else's and have it on the Xbox, but then have additional information on the HoloLens so that when you're playing, you can actually use it as a HUD for your environment. And hypothetically, I think that's totally doable. Just nobody's really gone out to do it yet. And but again, that means there's nothing built in for doing communication between the Xbox and the HoloLens. It's just what you already know about inter-device communication.
Okay. So I know you have the background in Connect development. So what are the main differences between developing for Connect and developing for HoloLens? And which one are you enjoying more so far?
Oh, so the question is the differences between Connect and HoloLens and what's more enjoyable. Um, so in a lot of ways, even though you've got Connect technology inside the HoloLens, it's not automatically accessible. Instead, that's being used for doing the room scans automatically, and you never really have access to the raw depth feeds at this point. Everything's sort of sandboxed in that way. And because of that, they feel like really different things altogether. Some techniques don't really work back and forth. What's similar between the two, though, isn't so much the technology, it's just the idea of working with 3D. And so the transition is between doing 2D development all the time, where you've got a normal Cartesian grid that you're dealing with, and actually working in 3D, where you're doing a lot more matrix math. You need to know about perspective. You need to know about basically how to do transforms of objects in the room. Um, and for me, that's really fascinating. I started doing some of that with the Connect, and with the HoloLens, you just really need to know that a lot more. It's sophisticated math, and I don't know if it's an open secret. Computer programmers generally are really horrible at math. So if you want to do 3D, you do have to get your hands dirty and learn it, but it's extremely rewarding. And then as far as what's more fun, for me, HoloLens is extremely more fun now. The learning curve is steeper, so I have to keep learning new things all the time, which is exciting. Um, but it's also forced me to learn a lot of 3D and graphics concepts that I really skirted off around up till now. And one of the big problems for me is because all development is really done in Unity. Um, Everything feels more like developing a game than it feels like developing an application. Whereas once I started doing this and looked back on everything that I've done before in my career, it feels like I was constantly just laying out text boxes and buttons on a screen all the time. Like that's what enterprise computer development ultimately is all the time. And doing this is just so much more exciting.
There's no other questions in the chat right this second. Can you talk about if if you were starting like totally green day one and you wanted to develop the HoloLens, what is the path that you would take to become the HoloLens?
Right. So the path to be a HoloLens developer is Unity. Unity is at the center of everything now. And as these new mixed reality devices are coming out, what I call before the occluded mixed reality, um, again, it's all built around Unity. So that's what you're going to have to learn. My experience is it's probably a 3 to 4 month learning curve to really get used to the IDE, to get used to the programming models behind Unity if you haven't ever done it before. But once you've mastered that, you're way ahead of the game. So really, that's the big thing. The other trick I think a lot of people have is figuring out, do I find the money and buy myself a HoloLens, or can I go ahead and do development without it? Microsoft actually provides all these tools, and so does Unity, so that you can do full HoloLens development without spending a dime. You can get Visual Studio for free. You can get Unity for free. The SDK, the plugins are free too. And then finally, there's an emulator that's free. So as long as you're running Windows 10 Pro, which you need because you're virtualizing, you can actually run the emulator and build against that. And there are currently 2 or 3 games in the store that where the developers really didn't have access to HoloLens. Instead, they were using the emulator the whole time. And it seemed to work out for them. So I think as a rule, what you want to do is get into it as early as possible. The hardest part is just that learning curve, getting used to the development model. Um, and get into it any way you can. Don't let buying a HoloLens be something that holds you up, because you don't necessarily have to have a device. On the other hand, it's actually really nice to have a device in order to try things out, but you don't have to. You're better off just jumping into it with both feet.
Okay, so somebody in chat asked, what's the HoloLens's range to a PC or a laptop?
The HoloLens is sort of fascinating. It's an extremely powerful smartphone. It's sort of the level it's at. It's got some extra tricks that makes it work really well. So normally with augmented reality apps, you need a lot of processing. And the HoloLens actually optimizes that because they designed their own chips in order to do things like the SLAM algorithms, in order to do the gesture recognition, and so on. All the really complicated math is actually wired in on a special chip. And that's how they can get away without going all out with the hardware. At the same time, the hardware is pretty powerful. I think most people know the sorts of games you can play on a decent Apple phone or a decent Android. And that's what you're getting with this. One of the stranger, interesting things about it, though, is that the HoloLens actually uses an x86 Intel chip instead of a typical mobile chip. That's just trivia worth knowing about, but I think ultimately it makes a lot of things easier as far as building applications and doing deployments.
Okay, one other question. Do you need an internet connection to use the HoloLens, and would you be able to take it anywhere, such as like a restaurant or on a plane?
Right, so the question is, are you always tethered to the internet? And the answer is no. It depends on the application. But because it's ultimately this is Windows 10, it's a Windows Store, think of it as exactly the same as a Windows 10 laptop or a Windows 10 PC. You need the internet in order to install applications and download applications. But once you have them, you can go ahead and just run them without an internet connection. As far as going around with them, people do. I've heard lots of stories about people taking it on the plane with them and having a fairly good time. And there's been no issues with that.
Doesn't respond. I've actually done the software repairs of the store and still nothing. I've tried, plugging other USBs in there, so I don't want to do it.
Yes. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have for now. Yeah, so I think that's all the questions that we have left in the chat. So thanks for the presentation and for showing up, James. That was excellent.
Thank you for having me.
So yes, I'll jump in really quick just to do the
You'll
outro, I guess.
do the outro.
Yeah. So thanks, James, for the presentation. So once again, we are the Georgia Game Developers Association, and if you guys are interested in keeping up with these live streams, we do have events coming up throughout the coming months in the summer. So be sure to follow this channel, and also if you're in Georgia and want to come to our monthly meetings, we do make announcements on Facebook. It's Georgia Game Developers Association, so just search for that on Facebook and follow us, and we'll see you soon. So a couple closing announcements. The GDGA Greenlight Connection page is up, so if you are a Georgia developer and you have a game on Steam warning Greenlight that you'd like added, be sure to reach out to us and we'll put it up. We have started a merchandise page, so you can get some sweet GDDA merch at cafepress.com/GDDA. SimFest is coming up July 15th. There's details on Facebook for that as well, and I do believe that they're reaching out for speakers currently, so if you're interested in speaking there, reach out to us and we'll put you in contact. If you are a Georgia developer and you want to do a live stream here on our Beam channel, show off one of your game or something in development, you can reach out to us at info@gdda.org. And the next GDDA meeting is coming up next week. It's May 9th. It will be on the future of VR at Motion Reality in Marietta. Okay, and I think that's everything that we got. So thanks again to the Microsoft Store here at Perimeter Mall for hosting us, and we'll see y'all next time.